Chapter 4. Conflict and Resistance. It is important for us to look briefly at the legal situation with respect to Christianity and Christian schools. Since I am not a lawyer, my perspective will be historical and theological. We must remember as we approach the framing of the U.S. Constitution of 1787 that, at the time, the idea of a secular or humanistic state was relatively unknown. It was the French Revolution which first disestablished Christianity in the Western world. The normal question was not, shall the state be Christian, but rather, which church shall be the established church of the state? A major factor in the American War of Independence was the American rejection of the second question. According to Breidenbach, quote, "It is indeed high time that we repossess the important historical truth that religion was a fundamental cause of the American Revolution." End quote. The great fear of the colonies, each of which had their own religious establishment, was that Episcopal bishops would be sent to the colonies to force the English establishment on the Americans. This fear of a central establishment remained after the war, and the Constitution thus was silent on the subject of religion. The central government was simply a federal union of states which retained their own powers to decide on all key issues. Even the avoidance of the subject of religion was not enough for the clergy of the new country. Except for the Episcopalian and some Congregationalist clergymen, most favoured no establishment. Certainly federal establishment was not wanted. The decision belonged to the states. As a result, the First Amendment was framed to quieten the fears of the clergy. Having recently avoided the danger of an establishment imposed from Britain, the clergy and the laity had no desire to have one closer at hand in the federal power. Article or Amendment 10 barred the federal government from all powers not delegated to it by the Constitution. Amendment 1 stated, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." End quote. The purpose of this amendment was to retain for the states their power to establish a church. In fact, all the original states had either an established church or recognized Christianity as the established religion. Established churches steadily gave way to the establishment of Christianity per se. Every political order, we should remember, is an establishment of religion because every political order is a law order. All law is an expression of moral concern or establishes procedures for the enforcement of that moral concern. Morality, moreover, is the relational and social aspect of a religious faith, establishing the faith's requirements for all communication and community between God and man, if a supernatural God is affirmed, and between man and man. Ethics is an aspect of theology. Law is thus inseparable from theology. Law is the expressed will of the God of a faith, whether that God be man or a transcendental being. Every state or law order is thus an establishment of religion. In the United States, humanism has steadily whittled away at the Christian establishment. It has professed a belief in a natural establishment, which is an impossibility. A state without an established religion is a state without law, an impossibility. Those civil governments professing no establishment of religion are in fact practicing a deception while they progressively establish humanism. When the essential civil government of the United States was transferred from the states to the federal government made clear its Christian establishment. The chaplaincy became stronger. Indian children were required to learn about Christian faith to be Americanized. The U.S. Supreme Court called the U.S. a Christian country, and so on. In recent years, however, the United States has seen a progressive establishment of humanism. Justice Blackmun, in the abortion ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court, cited pagan and humanistic religious authorities and avoided the truly Christian. Neither the courts nor the schools have been neutral. They have been radically and systematically humanistic. In recent years, the 14th Amendment has been used to interfere with a state's jurisdiction over its own religious character. The prohibition of the First Amendment has been transferred from Congress to the states, while the federal government has steadily, with the coordinate action of many states, worked to establish humanism. The meaning of the First Amendment has thus been turned upside down. The Christian today, as in the days of Rome, is dealing with a state which denies that there is any conflict, even while it persecutes the Christian. A state which says that the Christian's life and existence must be on its terms, and which affirms another God while denying that it is hostile to Christianity. How shall the Christian act in relation to the state? It is almost impossible to counsel any kind of resistance without being told that it is in violation of Romans 13:1-10. In fact, I was once told in writing that my criticisms of the Federal Reserve System violated Romans 13. We must remember, however, that neither Paul nor his successors stopped preaching their illegal gospel. They obeyed the state in matters of taxation, tribute and custom, honour, respect for officers of the state, compliance to laws and standards, and so on, but they refused to abandon the propagation of the faith in any way. Rome was ready to recognize Christianity as a legal, taxable religion under Caesar's authority, but Christians denied the right of Caesar to tax or control Christ's domain, nor was Christ's kingdom for them subject to recognition by Caesar. Caesar was dependent on and the creature of Christ, not vice versa. Briefly, the Christians believed that because there is no power but of God, Romans 13:1, our basic and primary obedience is to God, not the state, to Christ, not Caesar. Paul, in asking that we obey civil rulers, does not ask us to be their creatures. They are ministers of God, God's ministers of justice, but they are not God. In terms of this, it is a sin for the Christian school to seek state approval of its existence as a school. The civil authority, where it regulates a building as a building per se, that is, for sanitary facilities, fire protection and the like, is to be obeyed, whether or not the law is to us a sound one. It is general legislation applicable to all public buildings. However, where the state seeks to license, accredit, control, or in any way govern the Christian school as a school, it is then another question. It is a usurpation of power by the state, and it involves the control of one religion, Christianity, by another, humanism. Because education is a religious activity, it is not the proper province of a state which claims to be democratic. It is then the imposition of the religion of one religious group upon another. The school, moreover, is a separate sphere under God from church and state, and it thrives most when free from both. It then serves not an institution, but its faith. The argument is often heard that, without quote-unquote public schools, millions could not afford to educate their children. The fact is, however, that just as voluntary gifts provide churches sufficient to house all Americans, so too schools can be provided for all the same way. In fact, in the early years of this republic, Christians provided remarkably good help to immigrants and schools for their children at a time when immigrants were pouring into the country. The major cost of all education, from kindergarten through graduate school, is still provided by families, not the civil government. The term, quote, secular humanism, end quote, is deceptive to many and leads them to conclude that such humanism is non-religious. The dictionary definition of secular throws light on its meaning. Secular has 4 basic meanings. 2 do not apply. 1, brought about in the course of ages. 2, occurring or observed only once in an age or century. two do apply. One, pertaining to this present world and life, contrasted with religious or spiritual. Two, one in holy orders who is not bound by monastic vows. Secular humanism is that form of the humanistic faith which is not ecclesiastical, but is out in the world, applying its faith to the problems of this life in terms of humanistic standards. The quote-unquote worldliness of secular humanism makes it no less a religious faith. In this faith, man is not a creature of the triune God made in his image, but the product of a natural world who evolved out of a primordial accident of life. Instead of being God's ordained dominion man over creation, Genesis 1:26-28, man is the subject of that creation. According to Oleg Stetsky, a Marxist pediatrician in Poland, quote, "The environment is decisive," end quote. Quote, "In other words, young people are what we have brought them up to be," end quote. In such a view, it becomes the duty of the scientific socialist state and its schools to provide that decisive environment and remake man into the desired image. This same sense of duty is present in the educators of the democratic humanist state. It involves a strong sense of mission and dedication, but an ungodly one. Christians today must manifest a like sense of mission and dedication for the Lord. John Dewey held that the school has the power and duty to modify the social order. It is the principal agent for the creation and development of the, quote, great community, end quote. It is the humanists today who have the compelling sense of mission. Christians must regain their world-conquering mission or perish. The Christian school is basic to that calling. The humanists have understood that the school is the key. It is time for the Christians to recognize this also.